Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Alex, all the way from Illinois. Welcome to the show, Alex. Thank you for coming on.
Hi.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Alex Montgomery, she is the Deputy Director of Let It Be Us, and you're also an adoptive mom. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And you've got a little girl, if I remember right, and if my notes from last time are right. Now, last time you, as I mentioned before we started recording, you dropped a couple of real nuggets into our conversation, which I loved, and I'd love to explore what those mean to you. The first one that you mentioned is secrets. What do you say? Secrets is where shame grows. Secrets are where shame grows. What did you mean by that?
Well, to me, so when people think generally about adoption, I feel like if you were to pick, the first 2 or 3 words that come to your head, secrets would be right up there, if not number one. Because of the history, because of the way we've treated adoption, because we, societally treated it as a secret. I mean, we literally tried to pretend that it didn't happen. We tried to pretend in many cases that a child was born to parents who adopted that child. I mean, secret with a capital S. And why would we keep that secret? Why is that a secret? I'm sure there are examples of secrets not being negative things, but I can't think of a lot. So to me, it's a secret because we don't want people to know. Why don't we want people to know? We don't want people to know because we feel badly about it. We feel shame about it. And that's the part that I want to explore as an adoptive mother. Why? Because then should my daughter feel badly about it? I don't want that. I can tell you I don't want that. Should I feel badly about it? I don't want anyone to feel badly about it.
No. And there's a very real reason that that we don't want people to feel bad, right? This shame is a very perhaps an overused adjective in today's parlance. This word toxic, but shame is a very toxic feeling, and I mention this every now and again on the podcast because I think it's a great way of understanding our emotions. And have you heard of a guy called David Hawkins? He has a scale of human consciousness.
No.
So the book's his kind of seminal book is called Power versus Force. And I mention it, and I often plug it on the podcast because it's a way of looking at emotions in a kind of more in a simpler way, I think. And this scale goes from 0 to 1,000. The scale of zero is dead, and 1,000 are the great religious avatars. So and Jesus and Buddha and people like that. And unconditional love is, I think, about 350. Anger is something like 50 or 150 or 150. Pride is 180. But the key thing, and the reason I'm talking about this, is that shame is 20. Shame is 20. Shame is, that kind of disempowered, what's wrong with me, locking myself away in the room, don't want to speak to anybody, the end of the worth, think of depression and things like that. Shame on that scale of consciousness is 20, and that kind of sums up to me why it is so toxic, it is so tricky, and therefore why we should be avoiding it. So when I was looking back at my notes from last time, I saw that quote, secrets is where shame grows. And I thought, what's the opposite of shame?
I don't know if this is the exact opposite, but maybe the opposite of secrets is openness, is being who you are, not hiding any part of who you are. That's what I feel like the secret is. It's hiding part of who you are, and that makes you feel shame. And so the opposite is not hiding who you are, and hopefully that being affirmed by, you know, you feeling affirmed, or by the people who matter to you, so that you don't have that secret, that nugget, that sort of dark place that nobody knows about, where you're feeling badly and no one can tell you, you don't have to feel badly about that. They can't tell you that if you're not open, if you don't say, hey, this is part of me. I think of people who are gay, who come out, that nugget, right? That same nugget that's inside that you're so afraid if you bring it out, people are going to say, you've sort of decided they're going to say, you're a bad person, you're not worthy. But if you bring it out, hopefully, likely what you'll find is people will say, that's great, that's fine, you're lovely.
Yeah.
That's how I would see the opposite.
Yeah. It's funny how you say that, because, and funny that you mentioned the gay thing, because when I thought of shame, I thought, the opposite of shame is pride. And, you know, we have, and I'm sure you have them over there in the States. We have these marches for, you know, pride. It's LGBTQ plus whatever. Sorry, I'm not up to date on the correct PC terms for what you say this, but yeah, they have a pride thing. So I thought about shame and pride, and then I thought, well, pride, you know, proud of being adopted, and I thought, proud of being adopted. I thought, I'm not so sure about, you know, like that. Does that feel quite right to me? And you know, is therefore pride the kind of the right, you know, the exact opposite? Am I getting too specific in my thesaurus-like brain? You know, like a thesaurus where you've got antonym and opposites.
Right, antonym and syn. For me, I like to think of it as being adopted is on the list of your characteristics, the same way, you know, being a good singer, or, you know, having brown hair, or, you know, like it can be maybe at a different priority level, but it's not this identifying, this is the only thing you are, everything is wrapped up in it. So maybe that's the sort of the pride piece, you know, like, yes, I don't want to whisper about it, it's not a secret, but it's also like I can be adopted, and then we can talk about something else. You know, that whole piece of it doesn't, it feels like the secret also makes it encompass you. And I wonder if pride makes it encompass you in the opposite way. And some people might be super into it and say, I want to talk about being adopted all the time. And some people might say, this is part of who I am, but like, I really would rather talk about singing. Let's not give it so much weight that you are forced to identify first and foremost that way.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I ran a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and it was on identity, and I was thinking about, you know, I used to say I am adopted, and then I flipped from when I came into this space, because it's about shorthand. I said, you know, like thriving adoptees. I'm an adoptee, right? I'm an adoptee. So in a conversation, I'm an adoptee, and I'd never said that. I'd never used that word before. And then the next one that came to my mind really was I was adopted. So adopted was something that happened, that happened to me. But then I got into the fact, well, it didn't happen to Simon Benn, because I was David Anthony Flower when I was adopted. I had a name, and then I became Simon Jonathan Benn. So I think that what we truly are is that you know, like we're not what happened. We're not what's happened to us. We're not what we do. You know, so I'm a podcaster, but is that, you know, I'm a public speaker. I'm a sometimes trainer, but does that define who I am? No, who we are isn't what we do or what has happened to us in the past. It's something. It's something bigger than that. It's, you know, yeah, it's something bigger than that. And the thing, the two ways I express that, I use that as a French philosopher guy says that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So, you know, I think of us ourselves as those spiritual beings, or spirit, or the diamond that goes through life, and SH1T happens to us, right? So, like losing your birth mother to a certain extent, it's something that happens to us. So the whole identity piece is a bit of a rabbit hole. So what does that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, I come at it from, right. I think we've sort of put it into like an identity bucket, when to me, I put it more in the structure of your family.
Okay.
So I look at it as, and we, you know, we have an open relationship with my daughter's birth family, which is very important to me. And we consider them family. We, you know, visit with them, we exchange gifts, you know. So to me, it's like we get hung up on semantics and, you know, property rights and how, you know, that can't be how a family is. I'm like, well, that's how our family is. So, which was interesting because in my family of origin, my dad was married before and got divorced, had 3 children who are my half siblings, and then married my mom and had me and my sister. So our family is already, you know, I've got a 35-year-old nephew and a 12-year-old nephew. So to me, that's my family construction. So to me, for my daughter, I don't think of adoption as an identity. I think of her family structure. I'm like, well, you've got this one, you've got these, the family constellation looks like this. So it's not about walking around, I'm an adopted person. It's about, if you ask me about my family, she just talks about it like, yeah, I've got my sister, she lives in California. You know, I've got my birth mom's coming to visit because they're family members. And we're fortunate enough to be living in a time and have a relationship in that way. But that's to me also a shift from this idea that like this thing that happened to you, it does partially make you who you are, but it's also, it's how the structure of your family, and
Yeah.
some another way to look at it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's another way. Yeah, and I'm always looking for other ways, like staying curious. And I say this a lot, like adopted parents seem to me good on you, and because I had my curiosity, I sounded a bit patronizing. I tell you what, I focus on my own curiosity, right?
Mhm.
So I try and live it. I'm not just talking about other people. But yeah, that's another way to look at it. If we have more ways of looking at things, then we tend to see better, don't we? So yeah, thinking about it as a structure of the family. So the other thing that came to my mind as you were talking is that because you mentioned secrecy and out of the closet and gay. I was thinking about that this week actually. I don't know why, but I was thinking about, you know, people being conflicted. People, we use this word a lot, don't we? Conflicted. So society says historically, heterosexual is right. That's the way, right? And then you've got a gay person or a person that is questioning their sexuality, and they're conflicted because, you know, society is saying one thing, but their instincts are saying the other. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, well, how does that apply to how does that apply to adoption and adopted people? And then what came to my mind was the kind of, like, lots of adoptees get um, get angry about being told that they should be grateful.
Mm.
So there's a conflict there, right? So I've never actually been told that I should be grateful. Um, I don't know how I would feel about that if that happened to me. Uh, Grateful about being adopted. I've been told that I should be grateful about other things. But if I was, so if I was feeling, if I was an adult adoptee who was feeling some animosity to my birth parents, for example, sorry, my adopted parents, for example, and people told me that I should be grateful, then that conflict, the conflict would arise between I feel one way and society tells me I should feel somewhere else. So, and then I would be thinking, well, I am what I am. That's a Gloria Gaynor song. That I am my own special creation. All right, but it's kind of pretty confusing, that, and you might rebel against society, or you might hide yourself away in shame, thinking, well, I'm like this, but I'm like this, as in I'm not sure about my adopted parents, or my relationship with my adopted parents isn't great, but people are telling me I should be grateful. You could go one way, which would be to lock yourself away in shame that you don't feel like somebody should tell. Somebody's saying you should feel, or you could rail against it, which is what a lot of adult adoptees do. Is they're very concerned about what other people think of them, and they're very angry about that. And I don't get that, because I've never felt that way. But yeah, that's what I thought was interesting, that the shame thing, and being conflicted.
Yeah, I feel so the grateful thing is sort of offensive to me because I think, this child is trying to grow up and, trying to find their way, and you're going to say, you're so lucky, when they're just trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to make their way. And so, they're doing the best they can. That's what I assume. But to me, the grateful thing and the shame thing is really, I mean, where does this all stem from? It stems from what happened. Something happened for a birth mother, a birth parent, not to be able to keep their child. Something happened. That doesn't happen when everything is going well. There's some sort of crisis. I mean, that's just in every single case. There must be. And at least historically, society has said, you're bad. You birth mother, you must be bad. And you adoptive parents must be good, which then leads to the you child must be grateful. That to me just needs to be blown up. Okay. So you've got, and that's what people don't want to talk about. That's my biggest, what I think is really the base of the secret and the shame, is that whatever happened there is so painful, and people want to somehow assign blame and then secret it away. And if we can get past that and say, let's take care of each other. There was a crisis here, and it takes a village, and we adopted this child, and we are going to do the best we can, and you're going to want to figure out who you are. And part of that is your biology. And those of us who, were not adopted, take that for granted. You take for granted that you can see who you look like, you can see where you get your mannerisms, that there are some things that are genetic that you have easy access to. And if you have to keep that a secret, then that feels really badly, especially when you're surrounded by people who get to take it for granted. So that I just really feel like that shame and be grateful thing is because we're judging both sides of the equation. We're judging the crisis that a birth family was in, and we're negatively, and we're judging an adoptive family like, oh, you must be rainbow and butterflies, and we're just humans. So can we get rid of all that? Because then the adoptee's stuck in the middle going, well, I came from the bad people and now I'm with the good people. And that's not nearly nuanced enough for
Yeah.
what's really going on. And it's too much to put on someone trying to grow up and figure out who they are, to take on all the other things that happened. I think that should be out there and available, but we let it consume the whole identity, and that's too hard, too much. And that's where I feel like you have the secret and shame, because also it's hard to go around talking about it, talking to your friends, being like, man, I'm feeling really shame. I feel really ashamed today that I'm supposed to be grateful for being adopted. That's a tough conversation to have. I hope we can have it, but that's where I worry that it comes down to the judgment we have for birth families. And then on the opposite side, the judgment we have of adoptive families.
Yeah. There's so much wisdom in that. And I love because you told me last time, didn't you? You used to be a lawyer. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
So I love the simplicity that you cut through to the issue there, in terms of, there's been a crisis, and we're judging the birth mom or the birth family on that crisis. And so we're traditionally or historically, we've been knocking them down and building the adopted parents up. And what comes to my mind here, we have quite a lot of, I don't know to what extent, sorry, we do have some people on the show coming at this from a religious perspective. I recorded one a couple of days ago, and that judgment thing is kind of laced in with the religious stuff, isn't it? Often. Mm-hmm. I remember going to, this is just an aside that, like, I found it a little bit strange. My wife and I went to Rome for the weekend with some friends. The friends wanted to go to have a look at the Vatican. We went in, and I saw people queuing up to kiss a statue, a stone statues of a guy, his toe, and it didn't really sit with me. And the Swiss guard guy who was is the Pope. The Pope's got his own army, hasn't he? This Vatican guard or Swiss guard. He saw me questioning what these people were doing, and he gave me a real what we call a Paddington hard stare. Do you know? Oh. You know, so Paddington's a kid.
Yeah. The bear. Yeah.
The bear. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, of course. Yeah, it was they make Hugh Grant was in the Hollywood version of it. Yeah. So Paddington. Yeah. So a Paddington hard stare, which means like a death stare. That's what this. This guy was judging me on me. Well, I guess I was judging the people. Like, I don't get this. Why are they queuing? So anyway, that shame, the shame thing, because we're into religious territory here, and aren't we, in terms of shame and judgment, whether we're talking about what's the posh word, judging people badly, denigration, is it, or building them up, holier than thou. We're into some religious stuff, so let's not go there.
Well, I also think we're just societally, and don't get my feminism started. We're also judging often birth mothers, and you're supposed to do X, Y, Z. So there's a lot. It's not just religion. There's other layers of judgment, both historically and as things hopefully evolve for the better, that are embedded deeply in what a birth family is forced to do in a crisis, and then how we judge them after.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about feminism, but when the thing that you were talking about there, the thing that came to my mind was, was what I found in my adoption file, right? So the adoption file was the file of papers letters from my birth mum to the adoption council, the adoption agency, letters from them back to her, the social worker's notes, the letters from from the social worker to my mum and dad, letters back from them, and the fact that, you know, my birth father and my birth mother had been going out together for 5 months, and when she told him that she was pregnant, he was like, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And I was thinking, so in my search, it was never actually about him. It was always about my birth mother, and I'd be tempted to be judging him, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be tempted judging him, but I thought, well, what would I have been like? I don't know. I haven't got a clue. I've never got anybody pregnant. Let's go back to the other truth bomb that you dropped in a conversation that I loved last time, which you talked about the pie. You said that the pie of love is not finite.
Yeah, so I mean, again goes back to this, like, they're the I'm sort of starting to call it the myth of the heterosexual couple with 2.5 kids, that somehow this is still, we're still clinging to that norm. And especially in America, and I don't know as much about England, but we really focus on this nuclear family. We focus on, you know, we don't live together, it's just the parents and the kids, you know, we don't live with the grandparents, we don't live with extended family. It's just culturally, at least in America and the WASP family I'm from, that's not how we do things. So then when you try to go beyond that, like in our case where we have a relationship with the birth family, people who are not in this adoption constellation are like, they feel really badly when they call the birth mom the mom, like, oh no, are you so offended? Oh no. I'm like, I'm not, because I have my role and I'm very secure in it. And the pie of love is not finite. You know, if you've parented, you want your kids to be loved by lots of people. So why can't they also be loved by their birth family if you're fortunate enough to have a relationship with them? Everyone knows love multiplies, you know, not everyone, but love multiplies. You don't need to like hold your role, like, don't call her mom, only call me mom. I have only had, you know, good experiences with that, and we have a very lovely relationship with the birth family, so we're fortunate. But it doesn't scare me that there's another woman out there who she calls her mom. She calls her birth mom, but her mom. That doesn't. I want lots of people to love her. So that's I guess where I thought of that phrase. Because I think people don't really know they're thinking that way, but when they get afraid, like, how can she have a relationship with her birth mom? What does that make you? I'm like, I don't know. I'm her mom. She's her birth mom, and she's her mom in a different way. I don't know, and it's all fine.
There's a few things come to my mind there. First off, you know, so if it's not finite, it's infinite. And I was thinking back to what you were saying about openness and our human, our cultural stuff. So it's going back to the question you talked about, the nuclear norm, 2.5 kids and all that sort of stuff. It's exactly the same here in the UK. Just as an aside, really, I was thinking, we talk about, you know, like, openness and open versus closed adoptions, and it's one or a zero, it's black or white, it's very very finite, isn't it? Whereas you think about, you know, if the pie of love is infinite, that's, you know, we've got what about infinite openness? You know, like, oh, it's open. They know the name. It's open. They can contact them by email. It's open. We see them. We get one letter a year. You know, like, that openness isn't a one or a zero. It's a spectrum, and and the further you go down the spectrum, the more multiplication of love. I love that. Do you know what I mean? Like the multiplication of love. I mean, who doesn't want more love in their life? Like, a mentor of mine says, like, would you like more happiness in your life? Who doesn't want it? Yes.
You're right.
Who wants more love in their life? And as soon as I'm saying that, I'm thinking about, I'm sorry, I'm thinking, maybe it's just my strange mind, a warped mind. I'm thinking about polygamy, and I'm not going there, right? We're not talking about
kind of, right.
That's a different sort of love. But yeah, and I was thinking, like, what if today's conversation is about that multiplication of love? Because we're taking something that is 1 or a 0. Okay, so I'm zero. 0 is a closed adoption. Like 0 is a fully closed adoption. How was I adopted? Well, my mum and dad met my birth mom once when they got me. And then, so that's pretty close, really. But it's not completely close because they didn't meet her. But then we've got that. Okay, people say, "Well, I've got an open adoption. I've got some adoption. So what can we do? What can we do to multiply that 1 by something else so that we've got infinite openness and infinite love? And let's share the love, multiply the love." And I've never thought of it like that, but it sounds quite cool.
Yeah, and I expand it sort of, to me, past adoption. I think adoption is sort of a metaphor because there's a couple of things going on. One of them is there's dynamics, there's that judgment issue, and it may be the birth family may be, and may likely be someone you wouldn't have run into in your normal course of your societal connections. So we have to question, why, you have to make that leap and make those connections across maybe a socioeconomic, maybe racial, maybe cultural connections. And you have to sort of open yourself to, that birth family was in a crisis and you think that would never happen to me. Well, it could have. So if you think about them in terms of, grace and compassion, you might realize you have more in common than you thought. And that sort of clicking that openness from 0 to 1 to, try to click that up. And I like to think of it beyond adoption, in terms of societally. We are certainly living in an age where tribalism is growing, right? The idea that you're different than I am, and I'm in my camp, and you're in your camp, and we're on opposite ends, and we're at war.
Yeah.
There's no way we have anything in common.
No.
When we know that's not true. And adoption feels like a little microcosm, like the bad people and the good people. And you're like, hold on a minute. Instead of focusing on the things that are different, let's think about the things we have in common. Then you get to move up that openness scale and you get to multiply love because you're like, let's find where we connect. My daughter's birth mom, I spent the last trimester of her pregnancy taking her to doctor's appointments. We got to know each other. We went to the movies, and it was one of those, we have a lot in common. We both like Golden Grahams cereal. We both like the actor Vince Vaughn. It's just stuff that comes up and you're like, oh, how odd. If I had met you in a completely different way, we probably would have been buddies. And then we are buddies. But you have to be able to like bring your brain there, because then you're like, oh, look at this extra person. Look at this extra, love and openness, because I'm not just stopping at my initial judgment that society has told me to have.
I love that. And I think that you brought your heart there. You said you brought your brain.
It helps to have my daughter and be able to tell her those stories. And somehow I just joke that love of pink and glitter must be genetic because I don't love pink and glitter, but my daughter does and her birth mom does. I'm like, I don't know. So I like, that's so neat having those connections. That's just so important to me. And it makes me understand my daughter better and have her, I feel like it helps her be more whole.
Yeah,
And I get to incorporate these interesting people into my family. And I love them. It's great.
yeah, this is great. Um, Something's just popped up for me here on in terms of like understanding, you know, understanding the commonalities and back to what, you know, what underneath we're all the same, right? Um, I was thinking that you know, we've talked about shame from I guess a few perspectives, but we've not talked about it from a kind of uh, a mum who can't, or mum, as we would say over here in the UK, that couldn't have a child naturally.
Mhm.
Do you see is that a big thing? You know, perhaps do you see that in your professional life?
Yeah, so that was not the case for me because
No.
I didn't try. But we definitely see that the organization I work for recruits foster parents, and we definitely see people who come after failed fertility treatments, and that is a very emotional and difficult thing. I think this goes back to the idea of, you know, the shame of what women are meant to do,
Yeah,
and certainly, so which to me is a societal pressure versus, you know, people having a very natural desire to, you know, to give birth to their own biological children, which I think is very personal. But I do think there's also that societal pressure piece that makes you feel like somehow you are not worthy, or you should feel shameful because you didn't do it in this way, which is another side of the same coin of the birth mother who, how dare you be in a crisis where you're not able to care for your child. um, those are, that's the feminist part I'm talking about, where both of there's that pressure on both sides that may be coming from external places, and then it invades your heart when you have done what is right for you, or
yeah,
you have done your best, you know, whether it's fertility treatments or whatever it is, and this is where you are. And so having some acceptance for that, and having society think about that it's okay that families are formed in all these different ways. And there's a lot of judgment on the woman, I think, in both cases, and that's painful.
yeah. Because you know, my story is fits exactly that kind of mold, the norm mold for adoption for adoption, as in um, unmarried mother, single mother to be, or yeah, pregnant woman tells tells birth father doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Birth mother in those days, in back in 1966 when I was conceived, um, but birth mother she had no abortion option, because that wasn't legalized until 67 in the UK. So she didn't have that option. She um, the norm, the societal pressure
Yeah.
was, you know, single mothers in those days were really badly frowned upon, or more, or worse than that. Um, and you know, and my mum and dad came at it from infertility. So that it's like that's the kind of standard-ish story. But obviously things have changed an awful lot since then. But norms are still pretty strong, and we've still got a lot of older generations rooting to that, stuck to that sort of stuff.
And it also reinforces the idea that let's keep this a secret,
Yeah.
or let's pretend. Maybe we can pretend, like, in those really tricky cases, let's pretend I gave birth to this child. Let's not tell the child. Let's let everyone believe, like back in the day. Oh man, there are so many layers to that.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like secret upon secret upon secret about, like, just like the mushrooms are growing in the dark.
Yeah.
The mushroom secrets are just growing and growing because there's so much dark space for them to grow. And then the child is going, something, I've heard, they're like, something feels like, they're not told, and they're like, something feels like maybe I've got something's different and I need to explore it, but there's no way to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is what we got to pull those mushrooms out. Like too much dark space. We need to just open the shades. We need the sun to come in. We need those mushrooms to shrivel. We need to, but there are, to your point, I mean, just the shame on both sides for the women, when it's like there's only one way to do this. That's what I also think about. I've had to confront myself, having adopted as a single woman, is I'm doing this wrong. I'm supposed to be married. I'm
Yeah, you're
supposed to
supposed to
have
be.
5 kids, and I'm going to step
I
into this.
I wasn't gonna say that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know. I've looked around, and people are like, "How did you? That's crazy." And when I did it, I had to confront my shame and my fear straight on and say, "Well, am I going to let that dictate what kind of life I have? Or if I have a family this way, or am I just going to try to walk past it?" So I have my own level of, dealing with, I quote unquote didn't do it right, which is also, I think, where my passion comes to. I mean, lots of people didn't do it right, if right is heterosexual 2.5 kids. I
Yeah.
mean, can we
Yeah.
stop talking about that's the only
Yeah.
way? Because look around, it's
It's a
not.
bit nuts. Yeah. Yeah. I had a real aversion to average as a kid. I had a real aversion to average. Yeah. Uh, in this little adoption file, there's this little booklet, and I don't know why it was in there, why it wasn't given, because it was just sat with all this documentation, but it was like a little bit of it was a tiny manual. It's about 4 pages. It's a little 4-page booklet about openness, and I read through it, and it's in the drawer. I'm gonna dig it out, and I will drop a 1966 truth bomb out of that on a further adoption podcast, I'm sure, further episode. I love your metaphor of bringing the mushrooms out of the dark, because those, they're gonna. Well, the metaphor that I use on that, I often use this on the trauma, the trauma ball. So the I mentioned the diamond earlier on, didn't I? Did I mention the diamond?
Mm-hmm.
So the diamond is who we are, the identity of who we are, the perfection of who we are, and they come in a million different shapes and sizes, but the perfection of who we are is a diamond. And then the trauma ball is basically all the manure, or the SH1T that we go through in life, right? And it's a bit like a snowball, that we were talking before we started about how weather changes, and how in Chicago suddenly you've got all this sunshine, and then you've had all this snow. So we make a snowman or snow person, and we scoop up a ball of snow, and around the diamond, okay, and then we roll the ball along the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how trauma works, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It gets darker and darker, and the more we concentrate on it, and the more they call it confirmation bias. So the psychology. So it gets worse and worse until we bring an industrial heater to the trauma ball, a snowball, and we warm up the we warm up the snow. It melts, and all that's left is the perfection of who we are. So by bringing, and you could use that same thing for shame, any limiting belief that we have, any thought that we're not good enough. If we bring that thought that we've kept secret out into the light, and somebody else would probably tell us, yeah, I felt like that too. Mm-hmm. And then we see that we have the same fears and inadequacies. They're not personal. They've got nothing to do with us. And the bringing them into the light of awareness and conversation has dissolved them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's identifying what is it that's making you feel that way. Let's talk about it, because I think you're right. You bring it out into the light, and it's often not nearly as bad as you thought it was when it wasn't.
And it's the same as that closet thing. That's why the metaphor works. When gay people talking, coming out of the closet, you're out of the darkness into the light, and they're often, well, from what I see, in on the television, they're terrified of that. They're terrified of the reaction. They're terrified of being shunned. The ones that, I guess, that's the stereotypical journey, isn't it?
Well, that's still, it's another good parallel, because, for gay children who grow up in families where they can evolve their identity and they've never been told that's bad, you can't be that way, it comes out naturally. And the parallel in adoption of also, this is part of who you are, you do what you want with it, you can be completely open about it. Then ideally, what I'm hoping for is you're never in that dark closet saying, oh gosh, I feel these things, I can't say anything, it's bad, I feel shameful, sort of never closing the door, never having that closet with a closed door.
Yeah.
That's the goal, but it takes us time to learn as a society how to keep that door open, so you don't end up in the closet.
Yeah. So I often say to people that I was told that I was adopted so young I can't even remember being told. So I was told with a storybook.
Yeah.
And and it normalizes it, and there's no shame. This has happened to somebody in a book, and this is the story, and this is how you came to this, how you came into our family, versus the 12-year-old or 13-year-old kid that finds some papers or gets told something and gets hit with the secret.
Yeah.
And then that whole thing that you started off by saying, people, why didn't they want me to know this?
Right.
Like who, you said something really eloquent about you've never heard of a good secret. There's no such thing as a good secret.
I don't know, unless it's a surprise, maybe. But yeah, I don't think so. Most secrets, I feel like there's a reason you want them out in the open. You feel badly somehow.
I think sometimes the marketeers use secrets as a kind of as a hook, don't they? Like to I know that I'm pretending that I'm the marketeer, right? If you're struggling in your life, but if you know the 5 secrets to XYZ or XYZ in the States, then you can have what I've had, and if you just pay me $9.99, that's
You can get the secret. You just got to pay them.
You've just got to pay
$99, and you can have the secret. That's all.
Yeah, and then you find out that there's nothing there. So I want to go back to the infinite. The pie of love is infinite. Let's just go back to that, because you shared a lovely little story about where that came from, with Boss Baby, which I don't know if I've seen it all the way through.
Yeah, well, if you don't have small children, I don't know why you would, but it was cute. It was, yeah. So it was the premise of the story is, the babies are worried that the puppy dogs are going to take love away from them. They're measuring the pie of love. They're measuring it, and they're like, we've got to get rid of the puppies because they will not love us as much. And then the epiphany in the story, the climax says, oh, wait a minute, the pie of love is not finite. You can love puppies and babies. But I do think that the metaphor was interesting, because it is this idea that you can only have your mom and your dad and your blood, quote unquote, those are your people, when any of us, whether adopted or not, if you explore who your people are, you're going to include, hopefully, friends and neighbors and biological family. And if you've got people who become like family and godparents, and who knows, but we sort of like throw that out the window when we're talking about adoption, and we act like, no, there's only this parent and you can't have the other parent. I'm like, really? Because in actual real life, you got all your network goes all over the place.
Yeah.
Hopefully, so the pie of love.
Hopefully, yeah.
It's not finite.
I've got a funny counterpoint story to that. A friend of mine said he said this to me 20, 30 years ago. He was 28 at the time. I think he's done it. He said, I've got enough friends. And I just, it's laughable, really. And I laughed. I don't know if I laughed at the time, because I probably upset, worried about upsetting him. But I thought afterwards, that's kind of nuts, really.
Well, there is some like social science around how many relationships you're able to maintain. So, I'm not saying that, you have millions and millions of close connections, but it's more the idea that when we look at adoption, we get so tangled up in the names and the titles and the semantics and the blood versus not blood and all this. Whereas in our actual real life, sometimes the first person you call would not be a biological relative. It might be your friend. And you don't think twice about that. You don't think, well, that's not allowed. There are rules to who you're supposed to have a close relationship to. You just call who's your person you feel close to. Yeah. So, if we could use that lens, it might help us rethink how we think about what adoption is and how we relate to each other.
Yeah. I remember I had a business coach many years ago. She was great. And there was one thing that used to like block us a little bit sometimes. I block most of the time, 99% of the time, which, I worked with her for a couple of years. And yeah, it's kind of important. It's important, the story, because she just calmed me down a bit. She narrowed my focus a bit. She never ever told me what to do. She just narrowed my focus so that I naturally realized I should focus my operations, and I got to some success, which then didn't make me happy, right? We talk about societal norms, that this whole idea, I'll be happy when, right? So So I wasn't. It didn't hitting the business goal. Uh, didn't rock. Didn't float my boat really, or not. Didn't float my boat for very long. And that set me off on looking at this journey about who we are and how our life works and where happiness comes from, all that sort of stuff. So 99% of the time that I spent with this business coach rocked along just great. But every now and again, she'd start picking me up on the little details, about my vocabulary, and so and it just like stopped. It stopped the flow of the conversation. It felt like I was back at school being told that I was wrong for something, and she was just picking me up on tiny bits of detail. And I thought, and that's what came to my mind when you said about people getting hung up on stuff. Like, and I was thinking, well, where do I get, hung up on the tiny details of stuff, and where should I be letting those go? And another one that came to my head on that is I got a mentor of mine is a great guy. He's a bit far out, so I've only ever taken one of my friends. No, well, not a friend, and like my acquaintance guy, taken one acquaintance of mine to go and see this guy, and the guy is a phenomenal inspirational speaker and just a brilliant guy. And at the end of the day of listening to this guy and a few other different people speak, I said to this guy that I'd taken down to see him, I said, "What did you make of that?" And he said he kept on standing. He went quiet, and then he said, "Oh, he kept on standing in front of the screen, like and when he stood in front of the screen, I couldn't read the whole of the words that were on the bullet points that were on his PowerPoint behind him, and I almost cried. I mean, this guy delivers such wisdom with such humor and such clarity. It changes. It changes. He's a life-changing speaker. And all this guy could talk about was the fact that this guy sometimes comes in front of in front of the projector, and I just thought that's absolutely nuts. And I'm sure that I do that too, right? I'm sure that I get lost in the detail. But what we're talking about here is, on the one hand, we've been talking about the pie of love is infinite. We've been talking about huge stuff, and that's what matters. It's the love stuff that matters. It's the infinite nature of this stuff. That's what matters, not the kind of like the tiny details that people pick us up on, right?
Not the definitions, not the legal status of your family members, not the, you know, blood connection. I think those are the trees, right? And we want to look at the forest. So if you just focus on the trees, and sometimes, sounds like your friend was focusing on like the bark, you're like, okay, step back a little bit. I understand that bark was bugging you, but back here, there's a whole forest and it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
And if you stopped worrying about every little piece, like, well, this definition, when I did the same thing with my daughter, I read her a book, I sort of made a little photo book that we read to sort of talk about it. And so when I said about her birth mom, I said, and she's your biological mom. And she looked at me and she said, she was maybe 3 or something. And I hadn't used the term before. And she looked at me and she said, I have 2 moms? And I said, yeah. And she goes, no. Because she was like, wait a minute, 2 mom, like I can't even figure this out. And I just thought, you think what you want. Because the term was sticking with her. It was sticking. She was like, this can't be right. But now, it's evolved and we don't care so much that that there's 2 people who have mom in there for her. But that's the thing, right? You got to step back from the bark and from the trees and go, oh, if I just look at this as a whole, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
as opposed to I'm getting really stuck on who's the mom and I'm adopted and this is so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. It's been great. I've loved it. The whole point of this show is to share those perspective shifts, right? That you
Right.
like when you say
Sure.
going from the tree to the forest, and then I love the way that zoomed in on the bark, and I said before we started that I was in the family publishing business from 1989 to 2011, whatever, and we were obsessed with apostrophes, right? We're obsessed with getting it right, and there is so much, and that detail is so soul destroying, and so for me, the freedom of the conversation on a podcast uh, is very empowering, because we're talking about big stuff here, and
Yeah.
we talk and I've left the apostrophes behind until I compose my next email, clearly after
Mhm,
we've
mhm.
spoken, and I worry whether I put the apostrophe in the right place. So as always, listeners, in the show notes you can check out connections to the guests organization, to their social channels, to their website, and thank you very much for coming on the show. So I knew we were in for a treat, and it was a great one. And as we explore this stuff, yeah.
Thanks.
So, is there anything you'd like to close with?
No, it was a great conversation. I love the perspective shifts, and I really appreciated the conversation, and good luck. I love it.
Yeah,
I love the
thank you.
conversation. Thanks.
And also, I remember something that you said when we spoke last time. You're writing a book at the moment. That's right, yeah.
I am.
So when that book comes out, then you got to let me know, and I'll put a link in off the
Great.
show notes. So we don't know when that'll be. We're recording this in May. It'll probably go live in May 2022. It'll probably go live in June. So, but whenever you're listening, if you're interested in checking out Alex's book and whether it's being published or not,
Yeah.
then that will be in the show notes.
Great. We'll take some time, but great. Yep.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Alex, and thank you, listeners. Thank you for listening, and we will speak to you again very soon. Thank you, and goodbye.